Welcome to the Master of None podcast. Adventures in a hands-on life. Build, grow, cook, train, explore. As I'm sitting down to record this, I just realized that I actually have no idea if we're going to be able to successfully complete the project that we are embarking on for this episode. Most of the time when I sit down to record, I have a pretty good idea that we're going to be successful. Maybe there are a few changes that we would make along the way, but at least we have a pretty good idea that we're going to complete the project. What we're doing today is making a meal, but we're going through the entire process from the field to the table, or more accurately from lake or pond to table. We are going to attempt to do a crawfish boil. The trouble with that is that I do not have any crawfish right now. So, like I said, we're going to go through the whole process. Back in the summer of 2007, I moved to Houston, Texas, and upon moving there, realized that these people in Southeast Texas, and actually all along the Gulf Coast, took their crawfish eating to a whole new level that I had never experienced before. Now, I had eaten crawfish before growing up, catching a handful of them, boiling them up, and eating them, but I had never seen what I was about to see walking into a grocery store during the crawfish season down there and seeing these bags of crawfish hanging up. I believe that you can buy a full bag or a half bag, and I think the full bags are like 30 pounds of crawfish and the half bags are like 15 pounds of crawfish. Now we're talking about a pretty small animal, so believe me, that is a lot of crawfish if you're talking about 30 pounds. And during that time of year, that's just kind of what everybody does. If you're going to have a block party or something like that, you buy a bag of crawfish. Everybody has crawfish boilers. Everybody has their own method for doing a crawfish boil. You boil them up. You have your neighbors over. Eat a bunch of crawfish. Enjoy some cold beers. Have a good time. Now, as I record this, my plan is to have a crawfish boil tomorrow. And I don't know how many crawfish I'm going to be able to get between now and then. So that's kind of the big question that you get to come along for, and either we'll be wildly successful or I'll be really sad. We won't have any crawfish, or maybe somewhere in between. So we'll see. Let's talk a little bit about crawfish first, though. They're really pretty fascinating. There are actually over 500 species of crawfish in the world, and over 300 of those species live in North America. So, if you just pull a crawfish out of a stream or a pond in one part of the country, and then you pull another crawfish out of a stream or pond in another part of the country, there is a very good chance that they are not actually the same species. Now, if you're down on the Gulf Coast and you buy those big bags of crawfish, chances are all of those crawfish in the bag are going to be one of two species, and I don't know what they're called off the top of my head, what the actual names of the species are, but the vast majority of those are actually raised in aquaculture systems in Louisiana. And I don't know the actual numbers, but from what I've heard, the vast majority of crawfish that are eaten, something like 90 or 95% globally, are actually raised in Louisiana. And most of those are eaten locally in the Louisiana and Gulf Coast area. So anyway, chances are it's going to be one of those two species. But if you live anywhere else, really anywhere else in the world, you're going to have some sort of crawfish species native to where you live. Do your research, but as far as I know, they're actually all edible. So what are these things? They go by many different names. Some of those names are crayfish, crawdads, freshwater lobster, mountain lobster, mud bugs, or crawdads, or some that I've heard in different places around the United States. Now, I believe, and maybe one of my Australian listeners could write me a note and correct me on this or enlighten me if I'm wrong. I believe in Australia, if you use the word crayfish, you're actually talking about a saltwater spiny lobster. And what we would call crayfish or crawfish are called, I think they call them yabbies or something like that. Anyway, if you live in Australia, write me a note and let me know. So, what are they actually? They are a freshwater crustacean that resembles a very small lobster. And I'm talking the lobsters with the big pincher claws, not the clawless spiny lobsters. So they basically just look like a small lobster. Now, most species can get up to around 6 inches or so in length when they are full grown. But if you just go catch a bunch of them, chances are most of the ones that you catch are probably going to be more in that 3-inch to 5-inch length range. Now, typically the part of these that you're actually going to eat is just the tail. Most people eat them by breaking the tail off of the rest of the body. Then you can kind of peel the shell off the tail, and it gives you a nice little chunk of meat there that you can eat. Now, on the really big ones, you can actually eat the claws too. There's a significant amount of meat in the claws on the larger crawfish. And you may hear stories about people sucking the brains out or eating the eyeballs for whatever reason too, but by and large, people just eat the tails. Now, like I mentioned before, these are very widely distributed, and I know, especially in the United States, just about anywhere that you go, you can find crawfish of one species or another. And some of them are actually going to prefer clear, cold, flowing water. Some species actually prefer and thrive in more of that warm, shallow, stagnant water, kind of like swamps and ditches and stuff. So basically anywhere that you are in most bodies of water, there's going to be some species of crawfish in that water. And as far as what they eat, they're really just kind of an omnivorous, opportunistic scavenger. So they will eat just about anything, any sort of anything they can catch. First of all, if they can actually catch a fish or a bug or a smaller crawfish or anything like that, they will eat it. They will eat plants. In fact, in some places, we'll talk about some invasive species later, but in some places there are actually problems with them overeating the plants and destroying habitat for fish and other aquatic species. They'll eat any sort of meat that they can scavenge. If there's a dead fish or anything like that that falls into the water that they can get to, they will definitely eat that. Or even just the detritus that builds up on the bottom of a pond. So they're really just kind of a vacuum cleaner that's going to eat anything that they can get into their mouths that has any nutritional value at all. So how are we going to catch them? Well, there are several different methods that you can use to catch them. And probably the simplest method, which is the way that most of us have caught them to start, is just catching them by hand. And probably the easiest way to do that is to go out after dark into the shallows of a lake or pond or something with a flashlight and shine that flashlight down onto the bottom. When that light hits them, it does kind of make them freeze for a second. You can just grab them with your hand and toss them in a bucket. Do be careful when you're grabbing them because those claws can inflict a pretty serious pinch. It's actually quite painful. So try not to let them get a hold of you. And if you actually just grab them, there are a couple ways to do it. In the front, they have these two claws. In the back, they have their tail. And in the middle, they have a single shell section. I think it might even be called a carapace, just like on a turtle. Anyway, if you grab them by that, they're not going to be able to reach you. If you just pinch them between your thumb and forefinger, I find that that's a really easy way to pick them up. Some people actually like to grab them a little further forward, more by the head and base of the claws, and kind of pinch those claws together as they pick them up, and then just drop them in the bucket from there before they have a chance to wiggle around too much and try to pinch you. Another way that you can catch them is actually with a hook and line. Except you don't really even need the hook, except that it makes a convenient place to put your bait. And I've done this before also, especially if you're in maybe deeper water that you wouldn't be able to wade in easily. this is another way to catch them. And all you're going to do here, and you can even use a fishing pole if you have a fishing pole with a line and a hook. That could be a really convenient way to do it, or just a piece of string with a hook on the end, or like I said, you don't really even need the hook, just the piece of string. Take a little piece of hot dog. I find that hot dog is a really good bait for crawfish. There's some other good baits too. My choice is just hot dog though. So cut a little chunk of hot dog, put it on that hook or just on the end of the string. Drop it straight down so that it sinks down to the bottom and lays on the bottom. Now, if you're in an area that has a dense population of crawfish, it is not going to take long. Probably just a matter of a few minutes before a crawfish is going to find his way over to that little piece of hot dog. They have a really good sense of smell, I guess. They use their antennas to detect chemicals in the water. So I guess it's kind of like smelling. Anyway, they're going to smell that hot dog from a ways away and make their way over to it. And you're going to feel just a very, very gentle little tug as they start pinching it and dragging it around. And what you're going to do, whether you're using a string or an actual fishing pole with fishing line, just gently lift that straight up. And oftentimes what they'll do is they'll really grab onto it as soon as it's trying to get away. You'll just be able to lift them right out of the water and drop them into your bucket. And then, just drop it right back down and wait for the next one. So I've done that before and actually harvested maybe, I'm going to say up to a dozen in about an hour of doing that. So, if you're just looking to grab a few, that could be a really effective way to harvest a few crawfish really quickly. On the other hand, if we're going to get serious about catching some crawfish, there's really only one way to do it, and that is with a trap or multiple traps. So that's exactly what we are actually going to be doing today, or I guess more accurately tonight. We're going to set our traps and then we will go check them tomorrow morning. Anyway, I have 4 traps that I'm going to set, and maybe this would be a good time to also mention wherever you live and whatever methods you're thinking about using for going out and getting some of these crawfish, make sure that you check all of your local laws and regulations around that. So let's go ahead and do that. I have here the Wyoming 2020 fishing regulations, and typically that's where you're going to find any regulations around crawfish harvesting is in your fishing regulations. So here on page 24, the Wyoming Game and Fish regulations. Here we go. All mollusks, which would be like clams and snails and stuff, and crustaceans, which would be crawfish. I actually don't know of any other crustaceans that live here in Wyoming. There might be some. Anyway, crustaceans meaning like lobsters, crabs, shrimp, crawfish. I know another crustacean that lives in Wyoming. Roly-poly bugs. They're actually a crustacean. They live here in Wyoming. We are not going to harvest roly-poly bugs. Anyway, all mollusks and crustaceans may be I'm assuming they mean taken, may be taken for personal use throughout the calendar year and shall only be used as live fishing bait in the water body from which they were captured. So we're actually going to do an episode fairly soon on some fishing. So that regulation may come back into play then. Because if we're going to use some crawfish for bait, we're going to have to actually go catch them in the body of water where we're going to go fishing. So anyway, back to the regs. Live mollusks and crustaceans taken for personal use shall be confined to aquaria at their final destination and shall not be released, abandoned, or allowed to escape. And of course, here in my mind, I'm just picturing like a little kind of Hogan's Heroes scene with my crawfish escaping in the middle of the night and the dogs barking and searchlights as they scamper back down toward the lake. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Okay, back to the regs. Traps used to take mollusks and crustaceans shall have the owner's name and address attached while in use. importation or possession of live Asian clam, New Zealand mud snail, quagga. I'm sure that there's a proper New England way to say that. We're going to go with quagga. Quagga mussel, rusty crawfish, or zebra mussel is prohibited. Ooh, rusty crawfish. We should talk about those. Let's back up though. It looks like basically as long as I have a fishing license. Actually, it doesn't even say that I need a fishing license. I do have a fishing license. Of course I have a fishing license. But this regulation does not actually say that I need a fishing license to even fish for crawfish. I guess it's fishing. I don't know. Trap them. Trap crawfish. So we're good there. And there's no limit on the number of traps or where I can put them. This is a pretty simple regulation. It looks like the only real restriction on the traps themselves is that they have to be tagged with my name and address. So let me grab one of my traps here. And so I have 4 traps. We're going to put all 4 out. And guess what? I have tagged them here. I actually ordered some like military surplus kind of just dog tags, custom printed actual dog tags that just have my name and address on them. I figured that would be the simplest and cheapest way to tag these traps with my name and address in a way that, if I put tape on them and wrote on it, then I put them out in the water because these traps go underwater. We'll talk more about trap placement later. I figured that was obvious, but the traps go underwater where the crawfish live. So we need some sort of tag that's also waterproof. So we have these little steel tags that are embossed, imprinted, something with my name and address. We have one of those on each trap, so we're good to go there. We seem to be living within the law. Now, the only other part of this that we need to pay attention to is this last line, importation or possession of this whole list of animals is prohibited, and rusty crawfish are on there. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that they don't want us putting them back in the water because they are classified as an invasive species. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that when they say importation, I'm sorry, not importation. I know what importation means. Possession, that they're meaning that they don't want us to keep them alive, like in an aquaponics system, aquaculture system, aquarium, something like that, where they might end up unintentionally being released or lay eggs that then get flushed and contaminate another water body with this invasive species. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that eating them is going to be considered an acceptable means of disposal of these invasive rusty crawfish, should we catch rusty crawfish, which I don't know right now if we will or not. We will see. Last summer, I was up in Minnesota and we put out some crawfish traps, and of the dozens of crawfish that we caught, I think only 1 or 2 individual crawfish were not rusty crawfish. And same thing in Minnesota, they are an invasive species there. So what we actually did is we kept all of the rusty crawfish and ate them. And I actually took the others out of the trap that were various native, I think they were northern clearwater crawfish, I think is what they were, if I remember. I could be wrong. I don't know. No, they're virile crawfish, I think is what they're called, because they have the bluish colored claws. Anyway, I took out the native crawfish, the couple that we caught, put them back in the water, and then we kept the rusties and ate them. So I think that's going to be our plan for tomorrow morning also. If I get down there and check the traps and we have a good catch of native crawfish, we'll just go ahead and enjoy those and eat them. If we find that we're catching a bunch of rusties and not so many native crawfish, I'll do the same thing. I'll sort through them, release the native crawfish, and keep the rusties. Keep as in eat, because we're not allowed to keep them per the fishing regulations like we read. So you might wonder how I'm going to sort through and know the difference between them. The rusty crawfish are actually pretty easy to spot. And I should mention they're actually native to the Ohio River Basin in the southeastern United States, in parts of Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So if you live in the Ohio River Basin in one of those states, that means that rusty crawfish are actually native to where you live. Now, they have spread to a bunch of other states. I couldn't tell you the exact states or how many or any of the details. What I can tell you is rusty crawfish are known to be much, much, much more aggressive and actually somewhat more adaptable than most other species of crawfish. So what ends up happening is once you get these rusty crawfish in a lake or stream or other body of water, they're so aggressive that they will actually kind of root out the best hiding spots and kick the other crawfish out, where they end up getting eaten by all of the other predators. So populations of native crawfish end up just absolutely tanking when these rusties get into a body of water. Not to mention that they will actually, being so much more aggressive, they'll actually catch and eat a lot of these species of native crawfish when they're smaller. On top of that, they're highly adaptable. So like I was talking about before, some species prefer those cool, clear streams. Some species prefer more of those shallow, warmer swamps. These rusty crawfish can survive just about anywhere. So any body of water that they get into, they just start outcompeting these native crawfish. And also, like I mentioned, they can really deplete native aquatic plants and destroy fish habitat, just all sorts of kind of secondary and tertiary effects on down the line from the introduction of these non-native invasive rusty crawfish. Now, we think that the primary method of introduction was actually people using them as bait, catching them in one place, driving somewhere else, going fishing, and inevitably some of them are going to get loose, survive, then they start reproducing. So that's why, again, in the Wyoming fishing regulation, any crawfish that you use as bait have to come from the water that you trapped them in. All right, so how do these traps actually work? Let me grab one of them here again. And if any of you have ever used a lobster trap, it's basically the same idea, where you have a funnel-shaped entrance that just makes it statistically more likely for crawfish to find their way in than to find their way out. And there's nothing actually keeping them from getting out other than the shape of the trap makes it difficult for them to find the exit. And honestly, as long as they have food in there, which we're going to bait this, as long as there's food in there, they kind of just munch on the food. They don't really even try to get out. Now, when they're outside and there's food inside and they can smell it, they really try hard to get in. So my traps are a rectangular box-shaped trap. You can also get kind of cylindrical shaped traps, but mine are this box shape, and the entrance, there is an up and a down on mine. On the cylindrical ones, you can just kind of drop them in the water, and however they land is fine. On these box shaped ones, you do need to make sure that they are upright, that the bottom is actually sitting on the bottom and the top is pointed upward, because the entrance to the trap, the narrow end of that funnel, is actually toward the top side. So they kind of crawl up this little ramp. They all get funneled in through this one entrance point. They jump in there, and then they can scurry around on the inside, eat on the bait, which we're going to use hot dog again, because I've just had a lot of good luck using hot dog as crawfish bait. So that's what we're going to use. And then if they do decide to leave, it's just really difficult for them to find their way back out just due to the shape of the trap. And especially if they're just kind of crawling around on the bottom of the trap, that ramp, they actually end up just crawling underneath the ramp instead of realizing that in order to get back out of the trap, they would have to kind of climb up the side, across the top, and then through that little opening to get back out. So basically just a clever funnel shaped idea to funnel crawfish in and make it very difficult for them to find their way back out. So in addition to that, it has a hinged lid, which makes it really easy to empty them out of here. And that just latches closed with a little rubber band and hook. And then when we're ready to get them out, we can just open that lid and dump them out. And we have a harvest of crawfish there. So, yeah, that's kind of how the traps work. Now, I did mention with this style of trap, they do need to be sitting upright. So if you have one of these rectangular box-shaped traps and you're setting it in an area that's too deep for you to just like literally wade out and set it with your hand, one thing you can do is you can get some small foam floats of some sort, just like make sure it's a closed cell foam because an open cell foam is not going to work very well. Anyway, a little piece of closed cell foam and attach it to each of the 4 top corners of this box. That way, when you drop it into the water, those pieces of foam are going to float and keep it upright as it settles to the bottom. And you'll end up with your trap sitting the way that it's supposed to on the bottom. If you're setting it in shallower water that you can just wade out and set it there, don't worry about that because you're just going to set it upright. Now, the other thing that I need to do before we get these set is I'm going to tie some lanyards to these and cut some stakes out of some scrap cedar that we can drive into the lake bed and then have a lanyard going from the stake to the trap. I think that's just going to make them much, much easier to find when I go back in the morning. So that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to go cut 4 stakes that we can drive into the lake bed, cut 4 lengths of 550 cord that we're going to use as our lanyards, attach each trap to the stake, get those wound up, load them up in the truck. We're going to drive down to the lake and get our traps set. So I will meet back up with you when we're ready to start setting some traps. All right, so we have 4 traps ready to go. I cut 4 wooden stakes, and I'm using cedar just because it's a little more moisture resistant, but I'm not going too crazy with it because it's really just wood scraps from construction. So if I need to replace them later, it's no big deal. And I sharpened one end, just cut it off at an angle so I can kind of pound it into the lake bed to hold the trap in place. And then attached about a 6-foot lanyard between the stake and the trap. So that's kind of what we have set up right now. So we're going to go set those pretty soon. Before we do that, though, let's talk a little bit about kind of your site selection and actually setting and checking the traps and all of that sort of stuff. So first of all, my preference is to set them in, I'm going to say 2 to 4 feet of water. And I like to set them, if I can, right next to a fairly steep, rocky underwater slope. Now, if that's not available, work with whatever you have, but that's just kind of my preference and what I've had good luck with, because I think I know the crawfish really like all of the crevices between those rocks as they kind of provide them some safety and hiding places. So setting your trap near where crawfish have cover is just kind of a good strategy. Now, marking the traps versus hiding the traps. This really boils down to your estimation of how likely you think it is in your area that someone's going to steal your traps, unfortunately. So if you're setting them, say, on your own private property, let's say you have a pond or something, and you don't think somebody else is going to sneak onto your property in the middle of the night and steal your traps out of your pond, you're probably best off marking them very well so that you can just easily locate them to pull them later. Maybe, maybe even tie the traps to a stake that's up on shore and painted bright orange. That's probably what I would do. Or have some sort of float if you're doing it out in deeper water, some sort of float on the surface so that you can go out in your little rowboat or canoe or whatever and grab that float and pull the trap up. I am opting for not marking the traps, hiding them. Unfortunately, I feel like In my area, if I did mark them, there's maybe a 50-50 shot that they're still going to be there when I get back. How long do we leave them out? Typically, I just like to leave them out overnight. So we're going to set them this evening, and I will be back out there first thing in the morning to check them. And that's simply because crawfish are most active at night. And I find that simply leaving them overnight, one night, is going to attract most of the crawfish that are in that immediate zone around the trap. They'll find their way into the trap, and then they're not going to be in there so long that they eat all of the bait, run out of food, start eating each other, all of that nonsense. So yeah, just overnight is usually good for the trap. And like I said, they're largely nocturnal, so leaving them out during the daytime, you're not necessarily going to see that much more activity. So set them in the evening, check them in the morning. Bait. We talked a little bit about bait earlier, and I'm just going to use half of a hot dog in each trap. And that's just because I've had good luck with hot dog in the past. Some people like to use raw chicken. Some people use beef liver, I think. I've heard of people using lettuce. I can't imagine that would be that effective. I mean, really, if I'm trying to coax something in, come on, a hot dog versus a salad. Seriously. So yeah, we're going for the hot dog. What should you not use? Although we talked about the crawfish being very, very scent oriented and how they'll eat just about anything, do not use something like catfish stink bait. The reason being is that the crawfish are actually going to eat it. They ingest it, and then that stink bait is actually in their body when you cook them. You do not want that, trust me. So go with something that isn't going to foul your crawfish boil later on. Before you set each of the traps, just check it really quickly for any gaps. These things are fairly sturdy, but they're made of steel mesh, so they're a little flexible too. So if it's been bumped or dropped or anything like that, it may just have a little gap, and you can just kind of squeeze those closed just to make sure that it doesn't have any gaps large enough that the crawfish are going to be able to squeeze out at the corners, because they will tend to fidget and fiddle with the corners of the trap. We did talk about keeping these things upright if you're using the box type traps instead of the cylinder type traps. If you're using the cylinder, don't worry about it, just drop it right in. If you're using the box traps, you either need to make sure that they're upright by physically setting them on the bottom or attaching some of those little floats to each of the 4 upper corners. So I think that's about all we have, and we're ready to set these traps. So let's go ahead and go set them. And I guess I will meet back up with you in the morning when we go down there to check the traps. And we're back. So here's the thing. After giving you guys all advice on where to place your crawfish traps, I didn't take my own advice. And guess what? We didn't catch any crawfish. Not a single one. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised. So turns out there's a rock pile that I was planning on putting the traps around, a rock pile where I knew where it was, and they've actually dropped the level of the lake a couple feet. So that rock pile is actually now completely exposed, and the ground around it is just kind of a mud flat sort of area. So we kind of lost all of that crawfish habitat when the level of the lake dropped. They don't have anywhere to hide now because all of those rocks are completely out of the water. So what I did is I went ahead and set the traps there anyway, knowing full well that that's not where I should be putting the traps, and didn't catch a single thing. There were some nibbles on the bait in the traps when I checked, but I don't know. That could be from any sort of little critter swimming around in the water. Maybe even some stuff that's small enough to swim in and out through the wire mesh of the trap. Who knows? So and collected the traps, headed over to a different location, actually near a dam where there's a bunch of like steep rocky slope going down into the water, and repositioned the traps. Excuse me. Basically reset the traps, and so we have those out now. We are not going to have a crawfish boil tonight because we don't have any crawfish. So I'm a lot more comfortable, more confident in our new location for the traps. So I'm going to head back out tomorrow morning, check those traps, and hopefully we'll have some crawfish in them, because I'm talking a ton of rocks, which is really what crawfish like. If you're looking for crawfish, look for those rocks, because that provides them all those little crevices that they like to scurry down into. Speaking of crevices, fun fact about crawfish, where we get the word crawfish, or I guess more accurately crayfish, is actually from French. They call them écrevisses, which is related to the crevice that they like to hide in, or crevasse in French. And the word écrevisse, you can see how, based on the some of the fish-like habits of the crawfish, like living underwater, that easily became crayfish. So there you go. That's where we got the word crawfish or crayfish, crawdad, all of those other terms. So I will meet back up with you in the morning, and we'll see if we have any crawfish in those traps. So a fun thing happened last night. We had a windstorm, and the end of the lake where the crawfish traps were, we had like 4-foot waves rolling in. Yeah, not even exaggerating at all. 4-foot waves. So I just got back from retrieving the crawfish traps. I got 3 of them back, which had been tossed up onto shore. So needless to say, they didn't have any crawfish in them. And the 4th one had been pulled out away from shore. So I actually still don't have that one back. I could see where it was, but when I was down there, we still had 3 to 4 foot waves rolling in. And I'm not about to swim out without some sort of supervision off of a rocky pier with 3 to 4 foot rollers coming in. I just know that that's a bad idea, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to have to go back at some point and get that 4th trap. But long story short, we still do not have any crawfish. Sorry. So luckily we have a backup plan, and I have some frozen shrimp. We're going to go ahead and go out to the garage. We're going to fire up the boiler. We're going to do our crawfish / shrimp low country boil with frozen shrimp instead of crawfish. I would much rather be doing it with crawfish, trust me, but we're going to settle for shrimp. So let's go ahead and run out to the garage, get the boiler fired up. We have all of our ingredients ready to go. Let's do this. All right. So unfortunately, we don't have crawfish. However, we had some frozen shrimp on standby. So we're going to go ahead and do our boil. So it's just going to be a shrimp boil instead of a crawfish boil. That's okay. Now, what do we have here? We're in the garage, and that's where I like to do the boil. So we have this propane boiler. It's kind of a steel frame kind of deal that holds up a big stainless steel pot and has this burner built into it with a little hose that connects it to standard propane tank, bottle, whatever that you can get from a hardware store or wherever you get your propane for your grill. So standard grill connection there. And big stainless steel pot full of water. And it actually has like a strainer kind of thing that we drop down into it. So we'll put all of our ingredients in there, and then when we pull it out, all of the ingredients will come out in that strainer. The water stays behind, and we'll dump that into our stainless steel bowl here that we have ready to go. So ingredients pre-staged. We have our small red potatoes. We have some chopped up sausage, some onions, corn on the cob cut into about quarter lengths, shrimp, and a bowl of some spice mix that I just mixed up. You can go with a Cajun spice if you want, or whatever seasoning blend you want. Really doesn't matter, whatever you like. So, important things here. We're going to need to keep an eye on this. So we have our little folding chair out here, a couple of frosty adult beverages ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and open up the gas on this propane tank. And has a separate regulator. So go ahead and open that up. You can probably hear the gas flowing now. All right, we have our boiler at a rolling boil, and all of the ingredients are in there except for the shrimp. So I'm going to maintain this at a rolling boil for about 10 minutes with everything in there. Then we're going to add the shrimp, boil it for about another 2 minutes, and then kill the heat entirely. We will turn off the flame, probably let it sit for another 5 minutes in there, and then we're going to dump it into this pan and cover it and let it kind of self-steam for about another 5 minutes before it's ready to serve. I'm not sure exactly the difference that I need to hit between the frozen shrimp versus fresh crawfish, but we're going to do our best, give it a shot. And so we have a little while longer before we need to add those shrimp. And in the meantime, it's about time for one of these. So turns out we had a good shrimp boil instead of a crawfish boil. And I hope, if nothing else, this shows you that I do not always succeed at everything that I set out to do. This is actually the very first time in my entire life that I've put out crawfish traps and gotten totally skunked. Not only once, but twice in a row. 2 consecutive nights of crawfish trapping without getting a single crawfish. That's never happened before, but happened this time. So, like I said, we don't always succeed at everything that we set out to do. That's just kind of the way it is. That said, we are moving on with life in general and with crawfish trapping. Maybe I'll make some adjustments to my crawfish trapping. Maybe my entire life I've had it a little too easy and have never had to deal with these other factors that I had to deal with this week as we attempted to trap some crawfish. So we're going to make some adjustments. We're going to learn and adapt because we always either win or learn, right? That said, we have some other projects going on, so whatever that is at this point, when you're listening to this episode, you can find out what I'm working on right now at this very moment by following me on Instagram. I am at isaac.r.gordon. That is isaac.r.gordon. Also, if you have any comments on this episode or any other episodes, questions, suggestions, recommendations for projects for future episodes, you can send those to me. Contact at masterofnonepodcast.com. I do try to reply to every single email that comes in, and I have a lot of fun stuff planned for the next few weeks or months. So hope you stay tuned and come along with me on those projects, whether we succeed or fail like we did this week. So that is all I have for this week. So succeed or fail, win or learn, pursue your mastercraft, and I will see you next week. Bye. Theme music for the Master of None podcast is Club Seamus by Kevin MacLeod. Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. CreativeCommons.org. If you need some of your own original music, go check out Kevin's other work at his website, Incompetech.com.